Hi friends, this is Marilyn from tarotclarity.com again, and this is the second video in a series of a few videos I'm doing comparing different trump cards or triumph cards from other decks. And for this demonstration or example, I just chose these 5 particular decks to show a range in time, location, and what, how they were perceived by the region they were. The first deck, which I didn't properly identify the decks I was using in the first video, so I want to correct that mistake. I'm using the Visconti Tarot, put out in 1991 by Lo Scarabeo. I have many other superior Visconti Sforza decks than this, but it's in keeping with the size of the other decks, so that's why I'm using it. And I have a soft spot in my heart for this deck because it was the first historic deck I was ever able to get my hands on in 1991. The second deck, representing the TDM style, I'm using the Artisan Tarot, and I have a I have a soft spot in my heart for this deck. TDM being coming out of Marseille, French style, separated from the Sforza deck by 300 years. We have 2 other decks put out by Italians. This one published by Il Meneghello. This is the Tarocco Sopraffino. And the next deck, and I don't know why I chose to demonstrate with this deck too, since it tends to remain in keeping with the Sopraffino, and maybe at some point I'll take it out of the video series, but it's the Perrin from 30 years later, and I like it. I think I use thread. I like it, and so I threw it in here, And then the last deck I'm using in the demonstration videos is the Albano weight tarot, which is similar to Rider-Waite-Smith, produced in 1909, except for the colors. They use different colors in this deck, but it's my favorite of the Waite-Coleman-Smith decks. That's why I'm using it. But the images, aside from color, are consistent with the 1909-1910 deck. Okay, so now we're starting this one with the Emperor. Now, like the Empress who came before him, we have a gentleman who is notably a man of power, identified by, a family motif or emblem. He's holding an orb, right? That indicates that he has divine right to rule. He's an older gentleman. He has in his hand some type of staff. He does appear outdoors. He may be a landowner. He undoubtedly is if he's an emperor, right? And, perhaps the reason why the Empress and the Emperor do appear out of doors might have to do with, their land and their whole, everything that they control, that they're gazing out onto their land holdings and the people therein. I did mention with the Empress, with great power comes great responsibility. And so, it might be said that he has the weight of the world on his shoulders, because when you have a lot, you have a lot to lose. Just like with the Fool, right? When you have nothing to lose. But when you have everything, then you have everything to lose. So he has to be a person who's very astute, very well read, very politically savvy, and undoubtedly in charge. In modern days, we don't commonly run into emperors, right? But in our common time, our modern time rather, we do encounter people of great wealth and power. I don't think his meaning changed all that much as we progress. In the TDM, we do begin to see him, although he still is outdoors and he has the emblem of the eagle, some type of crown or headgear and his staff with the orb and the cross. But he does appear to be kind of half sitting, half standing, as though he could jump up and at any moment, right? He doesn't. He seems like he's half sitting, half standing. And interestingly, a lot has been made of this. He does seem to sit in the posture of the number 4, which is eventually the number that was assigned to him. Again, with these 2 Italian decks, we have much of the same symbolism: the eagle, the scepter, which doesn't have an orb, but we get the idea of who he is. In this one, I'm not sure if he is outdoors. He looks like he's in a carpeted area, but it's kind of ambiguous. And then when we get to the Waite Coleman Smith, we have other symbolism, which the occultist thought would add to his identity. Like the original that we have. He's a bearded man, white bearded man, meaning he's an older gentleman, or maybe he's older beyond his years, right? Now we have, symbols that are different from what we had before, but we still get the idea that he's a man in power. So with the exception of these additional visual clues to the occultists, I think we can understand this gentleman in the same way across the board. Now here we have the last of the early cards depicting people. And in the sequence, the Pope is the highest ranking. So individuals in charge of moral guidelines or moral issues would have been seen as a higher ranking individual than an emperor. In some cases, though, those 4 cards, the female Pope, the Empress, the Emperor, and then the Pope, were kind of tricky because, if you figure the Middle Ages and, the Renaissance, positions of power were kind of tricky things, and it was dangerous to align yourself with the wrong people. And so sometimes, especially I think in the the Bolognese decks around 1725, they abandoned those four categories, and they just had like the 4 Moors. So they just had 4 people of the worldly, of the world. Some might have been had symbolic references to a spiritual nature, and others to more secular. And then, of course, with the Swiss decks, we have Juno and Jupiter. So the 4 cards, from the female Pope to the Pope, could have been politically dangerous or politically tricky cards, because you wouldn't want to be representing any particular person that would offend the people in charge, so they had to be very careful. At any rate, so here we have the triple tier identifying the triple-tiered crown, identifying this man as a pope. He's got the gesture of benediction, of blessing, and he holds his scepter, which of course is a spiritual or religious one referencing Christianity. I'm sure his garment holds significance probably to the Visconti Sforza clan. Maybe he was, someone in their family. Again, if you want to reference who these individuals might be representing, this is a good source. This is created by Christina Dorsini, who was Meneghello's Osvaldo. I apologize. I'm pulling a senior moment here about his first name. Osvaldo Menengello's stepdaughter. Oh, sorry about that. Sometimes my brain doesn't work. But at any rate, you could pull that book to see who more specifically each of these people might be or who they represent. Right? So we definitely get the understanding that this is an individual who appears to be in Door and is a high spiritually ranking individual of moral authority. Here we have much the same. What appears to be a triple crown and even a triple tear in his staff. We have, he's doing the benediction or the blessing, gesture with his hand. We have reference to the stigmata, so this is like uber Catholic. We have two figures before him, perhaps pilgrims with their tonsured hairstyle, who have sought an audience of the Pope. They might also be holy men. They might be friars, Again, the pilgrims, and you see, again, get this in focus, the style of hair. It's called a tonsure, where there's a bald spot in the center and then hair growing around it. Oh, what happened here? Oh. And here we don't have the pilgrims, but we still have much of the same representation, the triple tear crown, the three crosses, or the three bars crossing, and the blessing. And then here we do have the tonsured individuals coming before the Hierophant, or I guess that translates to high priest. And he has much of the same symbolism. So we might see this individual as someone of, high moral integrity, right? Certainly in the day when the image was, first fashioned, he would have been seen as a authority figure in the realm of moral and justice, right? Just moral justice, like a high authority as far as, morality goes. But that, come on, let's face it. I mean, how many popes were corrupt? I mean, lots of them. And so the card also, I think, can have, some kind of corruption about it when you do a reading. Now, I think across the board, we would understand all these characters as probably containing most of the same meaning. I mean, he's blessing, right? He's given the sign of blessing. So if someone wants permission to do something and you get an individual of high moral authority who's giving you the blessing, go ahead. I mean, I think you could interpret it as, well, you're getting the blessing, that morally it's the correct thing to do. But if there are other cards around it that suggest, corruption, and there might be other cards that could suggest that, then you might think that this might be a person who is corrupting their power, because that is another aspect of this individual, So here we're moving on to the Lover, and sometimes it's called the Lovers. Now in this deck, it's clearly a betrothal, or commemorating, a betrothal or a wedding of two individuals of the Visconti Sforza clan, right? The Cupid stands on a column that could have, we see a column in fortitude in some cards, right? In some decks, like a column of strength, So, this is a union that has some solidity to it. It's not to be broken. We do have Cupid is blindfolded, which is a detail we see in the earlier TDM style decks. But by the time we get to Convert, which is TDM 2, that's a completely different, well, it's not completely different, but it's a different stylistic branch of TDM. We have again the lovers, but then there's like 3 of them, right? So we have a gentleman, whereas here it's decided that these 2 are together and this is some kind of promise made or some kind of commitment made to each other. But here there's ambiguity. There's a young man with more than one woman. And it's called the lover, not the lovers. So in some ways, this particular image can strike the thought of this young man has to make a choice. Or is he making a choice between vice and virtue? Is he making a choice, of leaving the mother and going with, someone else? His new woman. Up until that point, his mother was the woman in his life, and now he's making a choice and he's going with another woman. I mean, clearly it's about love because Cupid appears and it's shooting its arrow between them, right? So this card has some ambiguity, whereas this card or cards like this don't. So when you see, this card, there might be ambiguity between a choice between vice and virtue. But here it really clearly is more about, a commitment and a promise made. And then here we wonder if the third person in the previous, deck might be a suggestion that it's, some kind of an official who is marrying the couple. So here we have, in keeping with 3 people, but maybe here is like a magistrate or someone who is indeed performing a wedding ritual. And here, much the same kind of image. Definitely still about love. And then here we have kind of a Adam and Eve kind of vibe, right? Which could go back to, choices of right and wrong. I think you could see that in this deck, making a choice. But now it is called the lovers. So now it, could be just in keeping with not only, a choice, but also with, the idea of lovers, right? Of a union or a partnership or a promise. So you see that the symbolism or on each of the cards can most definitely, obviously, influence how you might interpret a particular card, right? They might be slightly different. I mean, most obviously, when we use the Rider-Waite-Smith deck, or a variety of the Waite-Coleman-Smith decks, I most certainly will interpret the cards in a quite different fashion than I would a TDM deck. And I have used Rider-Waite-Smith or Waite-Coleman-Smith decks. In fact, I probably have almost as many Waite-Coleman-Smith decks as I have TDM, right? So there have been times in my life where, especially since it was so hard to get any kind of TDM or PIP style deck where all I could get my hands on were cards of the Waite-Coleman-Smith variety, right? Or clones that came after. So I have a lot of them. So I am well versed and well read, and I understand these kinds of decks, especially here or the Italian decks, as being different languages, right? They all bring something different, a little bit different. There's something different, right, that we respond to that might flavor our interpretation. Okay, so here now we have the Chariot. And in this case, the Visconti Sforza, it's a woman who definitely represented a female member of their family. Probably the one that the deck was being commemorated. The deck was commemorating, her wedding to whoever. I forget the details, so please don't hold that against me. But, it only takes picking up a book and figuring it out, right? But at any rate, we have a sense of, and the story about this one is very interesting. About Bianca, that's who it is. It's Bianca. It's very interesting because she actually did charge into a dangerous situation and to save her husband or something like that. So it's very interesting. So if you can get your hands on the deck by El Meneghello and the book that goes with it, I would suggest you do that. But at any rate, so we have like a charioteer and two horses. Obviously, the feeling you get here is, charging, taking control of a situation, which she did. Now we have a gentleman who is more traditionally associated with chariots and charioteers. He's a victor, right? The number 7 is very interesting because the number 7 is kind of like a number that means moving forward to a different level, transcending. It's a number of transcendence across many philosophies regarding number. And so the number 7 for the charioteer is a perfect number combination, I think, in my mind. But again, before him, there are two horses. They all, in the convert, appear to be looking in the same direction. So there's a sense that they're all in agreement and they're all in unison. The mind and the physical, maybe the mind and the spiritual and the physical are all on the same page. A plan of where to go, how to move forward. But also, if you bear in mind what charioteers usually were, they were usually heroes. They were usually people who have achieved or accomplished something, right? And they're celebrated. And we still do that today in parades, right? The hero astronauts in the old days in the 60s, they were in their cars, and they would wave. Presidents, would wave from their cars before the assassination of John F. Kennedy, right? They would appear in cars and wave, for what they've accomplished or what they've achieved. They were, they were celebrated. That sadly is that tradition, I guess, has kind of died out after that assassination, and it happened to Ferdinand too, right? The Duke. So here again, another Italian deck with the tradition of a charioteer being a man. Two white horses. They all appear to be looking in the same direction. This one seems to be a little more fussy, but generally looking in the same direction. Here the horses look at themselves. Like, yeah, this guy wants this, but we got something else in mind. But in this deck, it isn't real clear. Let's see what the gaze is of the king or the gentleman here. He might be looking this way or he might be looking forward. I don't know. Because the nature of this printing, I forget what type of printing this was. But it's kind of blurry, So the original sheet is a blurry sheet, so it's kind of hard. But the horses look like they might be in unison because they look like they're bouncing an idea off one another, right? Or they might not be in unison at all about how to move forward. Maybe one wants to go this way, one wants to go that way. So these are all things that you have to consider when you're doing an interpretation. And then here we get something completely different. We get a sphinx, we get the celestial canopy. So we get, a different message here. And I'm probably going to stop with card number 8 for today. I'll do 2 more videos tomorrow. And I'll continue on, but I don't like them to be too long because I think when videos get too long, people can't watch them for very long, and then they may never come back to them. So I like to do things in bite sizes, right? Okay, so now we have justice. Now, justice was traditionally 8 until we get to the occultists, and you'll see what they did here. They've appropriated fortitude and changed it to strength for the 8th card. I think in keeping with signs of the zodiac, and I think it was very more convenient to associate it with Leo. Okay, so we have justice with her scales, right? They appear more or less to be even. Her sword. And again, a reference to Bianca, who did don a knight's outfit and did go to protect her husband or fight on behalf of her husband. So in this particular deck, the Visconti Sforza deck, there is that reference to her being right. You know, if she's appearing with justice, it means that her actions were proper and right, because this is a card of righteousness, right? So there is that little extra element of, you know, personal flavor that identifies the deck with the family. But hey, it's their deck and they can do whatever they want. But justice is here. This is justice, you know, showing, you know, a right and true path, righteousness, right? And we have justice here with the conver. She looks right at us, right? She is looking straight at us like, I know what you did. I know the facts. She's not blindfolded, which I believe makes her different from TDM1. I think that was one of the differences, but I have to go back and look. But justice needs to see the truth, right? And you see that the scale is close to being even, but maybe not. There's a slight tip of the scale. You know, sometimes justice, to be fair, isn't equal. She does appear to be outside, which is interesting. And she is outside here as well. And, you know, she maintains to appear. And I don't know if she's outside here or not. She's on a bench in these two. So it's not real clear. Now she also appears now with wings, right? The wings of justice, which may have been something that resulted from misunderstanding the back of a chair. I think sometimes, like you see it in the Empress, you see it in other, you know, you see it sometimes, you know, where the back of a chair may have been misunderstood to be wings, or the back of the chair inspired them to add wings, or maybe it had nothing to do with that at all and they just were the wings of justice, right? In these cards, you know, this here, the scales are tipped a little bit, tipped more significantly here. Slightly tipped, but basically even Steven there. And let's put strength aside and let it switch places with this card. And we have much the same iconography, right? The sword of justice, the scales of justice. She's not blindfolded. The wings or chair, throne, or fancy chair she was sitting in have now become columns with some kind of upholstery hanging between them. So we get the sense that this card across the board is a card of justice, of righteousness. You know, when it appears in a spread, you know, if you're waiting on a decision, you know, the answer would be that the answer will be a fair, and the outcome would be a fair and just outcome. But that is very ambiguous, because what's fair and just might not be the side a person's on, right? But if other cards are favorable, it could suggest that the person will have a desired outcome. Okay, friends, so now we're at the 30-minute mark, and I think I'm going to stop for now and continue with the Hermit when we pick up this series in a day or two. Until next time, friends, Peace, stay well, and come back, because this one's a good one. I like this one. Bye.